Do you or your partner make $100,000 a year? Congratulations, you can probably qualify for a home loan. But can you actually afford one? In today's video, we're going to talk through how much home you can actually afford or how much home you should budget for if you're making $100,000 a year. My name is Matt Thomas with Baird & Warner Real Estate. I'm a real estate agent in Chicago, Illinois. I've helped hundreds of buyers, sellers, and investors accomplish their goals around Chicagoland, and I plan to help many more. If you are watching this video and you haven't already, please subscribe, like this video, send it with somebody who would find it useful. I appreciate all the support. It helps me, and it hopefully will help more people come into contact with this content. Because today, we're talking about something that I think is pretty important. There's two frames of thought when you talk to a lender that you should really have in mind. Number one is the framework of what the lender will actually pre-approve you for. This is the amount of money that they tell you on paper they'd be willing to loan to you based on your income. The secondary number is your own budget, how much money you want to spend, or maybe how much money you comfortably can spend in the marketplace. And believe it or not, those numbers are often drastically different from each other. So today we're going to talk about both, but we're going to keep a strict eye on the budget side of things. I don't really care what your lender says you can spend. I want you to understand what you should spend using every bit of traditional logic we have available. Fair warning, there are going to be a lot of numbers flying around today, and I'm going to be talking about Chicago properties. That's the market I serve. It's the market my clients work in. That said, the theory behind this video and the math that we're using is replicable. So you could use this in your local market, whether you live in Alabama or Pennsylvania or wherever you live. You can use this same approach to not only set your budget, but then to reverse your way back from it and find homes that meet that budget. So jumping right in, let's break down what you're actually bringing to the table and how much money you're going to be able to get from the lender if you're making $100,000 a year. If you're making $100,000 a year, you're making roughly $8,333 a month in gross income. Now, your lender is not going to recognize all of that, unfortunately. They're going to cut that by about 50%. So in the lender's eyes, you're making about $4,166 gross income on paper for your pre-approval purposes. Now, from that $4,166, they're going to subtract any existing debt that you have. This is things like credit card payments or maybe your car payment if you have one. On the credit card payments, important to note, it's the minimum payment. So not the total sum of what you owe, just your minimum monthly payments. Whatever debt you're obligated to meet every single month and you have minimum payments for that, like a car payment, the lender is going to take that into consideration and they're going to apply that against the loanable amount. So in this case, let's assume you're an average American. Believe it or not, average car payment in America is $500. So, okay, $500 for a car payment, plus you have $100 in debt. Let's just be very generous. You got $100 in credit card debt. So we need to take an additional $600 off of that $4,166. We're now left with a new budget or your lendable budget of roughly $3,500 per month. That sounds great. I mean, when you're thinking about that in terms of applying it to the marketplace, you can afford a lot of home for $3,500 a month. The problem is, it's not safe to assume you can spend what the lender will give you. I would even go a step further and say be very careful with this information. The pre-approval for me is your golden ticket to be able to write an offer somewhere. It is validation that a lending source somewhere will give you funds, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of funds, to go buy a home. So it is important, and I am not in any way trying to knock having the conversation with the lender. What I am saying is be very cautious about taking that number and using it as your guideline for how much you should spend in the marketplace. It's not meant to be that. And depending on the market variables, that number the lender gives you might be way off from actually what you want to budget month to month for your housing payments. So let's come up with a better approach here. First off, we've been talking about your gross income this whole time. $100,000, how much you make per month gross is $8,333. You have to pay taxes and some other overhead every single year. So most Americans are bringing home about 75% of their income. I know it varies by state. We're going to use that for this video. So instead of $100,000 a year, you're really making $75,000 a year if we look at your net income. Adjusting for the net versus gross, now that 8,333 becomes 6,250, which is a drastically lower number. But remember, the lender is still telling you you can spend up to $3,500. $3,500 taken into account against that 62 and change, you're spending over 50% of your monthly income on your housing alone before you take into account anything else. I mean, you want to travel? You want to buy clothes? Do you have an unforeseen expense pop into life? Are you saving for the future for your retirement? I mean, you're drastically eating into your ability to do all those things just by paying that amount. And that's simply by changing the way that we look at your budgeting. By definition, this is called being house poor. If your costs of living in the place you are 57% of your monthly income, you're spending a significant portion of your income on your cost of living. You're probably not saving adequately for the future. You're probably not having nearly as much fun in life as you'd like to. This is a difficult situation to be in. It's one that unfortunately many Americans find themselves in, but it is one you want to avoid at all costs. You can see how if you just took that $3,500 budget from the lender and ran into the market and deployed it, you could very quickly run into this situation, which is why we're going to take a different approach today. I would suggest, why don't we use the 30% rule instead? So remember, our net monthly income, because we're always going to use net. Gross is just leading to danger because you're not accounting for the money you're going to lose out the gate for taxes and things like that. So focus on the net. 6250. 30% of 6250 leaves you with a budget, a monthly budget for your mortgage of about 1875. That's a drastically different number than 3,500. I can't stress this enough, but that's a fair estimate for what you should be trying to spend if you want to maintain some semblance of a budget and savings, etc. in life. 1875. Now, that number doesn't really mean anything until we look at it relative to a budget. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to break into an example of a budget. Before I get crucified in the comments by everybody following, I can't tell you exactly what you spend month to month. I'm sure you know better than I do. I have to kind of generalize here. And it's even harder to get local data, like to figure out what an average Chicagoan spends on groceries versus like an average American. So a lot of the numbers that I use are just looking at an average American across the United States. It's not going to take in really expensive areas or really inexpensive areas. It's just meant to be a generalization. So please let me go. But it will be a good way to give you an example of what a budget should look like. And more importantly than the actual numbers you fill in here, which you can certainly do on your own, are the percentages we're going to look at and the rules or the premises that we're going to follow that are generally accepted ways to set a budget. There are many different ways to set a budget, but we're going to use one of the most commonly accepted percentage-based budget styles, the 50-30-20 rule. So more or less, 50% of your expenses should be dedicated to the needs category, things like your mortgage, car payment, insurance, daycare if you have kids, groceries, things you need to survive in life. That's the need category. Then you have your wants category. This is the entertainment, clothes, going out to eat, going on vacation, things that you could survive without, but you might lose your sanity if you did it for too long. So you certainly want to save some money for that. Then you have the savings portion. This is paying down debt, saving for retirement, saving for your kids' college fund, whatever you're doing for that long-term savings and plannings, you want to have a goal for that. We're going to set 20% as a threshold there. So if we're assuming that 6250 is our budget for all of this, that's your net take home that we're going to plan all of this off of, you want to be having a 50% split of capped around $3,100. 30% would hit you around $1,875, and then your savings would be at $1,250. So according to this, you might look at this and think, okay, $3,100 in my needs category. That's not that hard to do, particularly if we're looking at the numbers here and we see, all right, I've put in car payment at $500, insurance, I'm probably a little bit low here. Let's say that maybe it's 120. It might even be 150 depending on where you live. Utilities, 300 is probably a fair estimate. Groceries is variable. I don't spend a ton on groceries, particularly when I was a single person. And now that I have a partner, it's certainly gone up. So if you have kids, this might be $600. So again, this one's really going to be variable depending on your lifestyle. Cell phone bill, I think $100 is probably pretty fair. Childcare, we could get into this in every market, particularly like Chicago. Childcare can just be ridiculous. So for the sake of keeping this example clean, we're going to leave childcare out of it. Let's just assume this is a single individual or a childless individual who doesn't have to worry about childcare at this point in life. It'll make the numbers easier anyway. Minimum credit card payment, I put $300 in here. I said $100 earlier. let's just use $300 here. Let's say that you got a little bit more, maybe, just so that we're being fair to everybody out there. Now we need to backtrack from this. You'll notice, okay, we thought that 3125 sounded relatively affordable, but there's one major thing not included in this budget. I haven't put that mortgage cost we talked about in. So this 1570, that's just your cost before the mortgage comes in. And again, remember, we're being lenient. You don't have kids, you don't spend a ton at the grocery store. If we go to this mortgage box and we plug in all of a sudden 1875 as discussed, you're already over budget. Now you're spending 55% of your monthly income on your expenses. This is a big problem for people trying to just stick to a standard, not even like egregiously budgeted life, just a balanced 50/30/20 rule that we're talking about, assuming some like moderate fees in life. You can't buy a home and stick to that budget using the numbers that we've discussed. So this is a tough reality. This is why many people are having to make a decision. Do they become temporarily house poor or at least flirt with the idea of being house poor in order to get into something that they want or need right now? Do you rent and just assume that the rental market won't get way worse, which in many areas it will? It's tough. And I'd like to say that there's an easy answer for this, but the reality is you're probably going to have to start cutting some expenses or budgeting slightly different and spending just over your comfort zone if you want to get through this marketplace. Okay, so we have all this information. What do we do with it, right? You know you want to spend somewhere around 1875. We want to try and keep that goal in mind. Let's ignore the fact that it does put you slightly out of budget right now and assume that you can move some money around to make it work. Let's figure out what 1875 looks like. How much home can you actually afford keeping the mortgage around that amount? So we have all this information. Let's use it to backtrack a budget. I'm in Bankrate again. I'm on the mortgage calculator here. Super easy. Use whichever one you like. We're going to start with a $350,000 home. We're going to assume that you're putting 5% down. If you could do more, please do it. Interest rates are not forgiving right now. PMI is a little bit high. So if you can avoid paying it, do it. But many people don't have that luxury. So let's just assume you're in that 5% category. 30-year loan, that's what most people end up doing. Traditional 30-year loan, again, 7% interest. Could you go out there and negotiate? Absolutely, you could. On a best day right now, you're getting, I don't know, high sixes probably. So we'll play with that at the end just so anybody who's worried that that's what's throwing the numbers, that's not going to be it. Homeowners insurance, 120 is going to be my estimate here. I think that's fair. It might be closer to 150 depending on where you live. Could be even farther north if you're in a community like Florida. I mean, God forbid. But PMI, $50 to $100 is a good guess. Because we're talking about a lower price point here, I'm going to assume it's going to be closer to this $50 range. And we're only looking at single family homes in these examples today. HOA fees change this calculation entirely. So let's focus on a place where you don't have hundreds of dollars of fees going back to an HOA and start there. Assuming no HOA at a mid-range tax point, 333 is assuming our $4,000 tax point. This home isn't even close to affordable. $2,715 is our mortgage payment, including mortgage, principal, taxes, and insurance. We're trying to hit $1,875. I mean, this is a $900 miss, even on the mid-range. So, I mean, if you want to look at the high range here, here's what it would be at 500, 2882. If you want to look at the low range, it would be 2548. So none of these are even close to meeting the affordability that we need if we're sticking to that 30% of your net income budget, which gives you 1875 a month to spend. Realistically, we have to take the purchase price down. And in this situation, knowing what I know about how much the purchase price will slide, it's going to be significant. Let me just take a guess here. I'm going to start by taking $100,000 off. I think that's probably about in the ballpark. So if we were to adjust from 350 to 250, so you're losing $100,000 in purchase price here. 5% down, 30 years, 7% interest. Let's go with that mid-range property tax again, 333. The property insurance, 1200, PMI is 50. Man, we're still too high. $2,083. So even a $250 home, $250,000 home is just outside of the range of affordability for somebody trying to maintain this budget. So, I mean, again, we could keep playing this game. We could go 240. Let's just see, 245. And then maybe we'll be more forgiving in this one. We'll say it's a low end tax situation. We did it. Success. A $240,000 home with 5% down, assuming the best possible tax scenario, property tax scenario, somewhere around $2,000 a year, you could afford. 1852 is under the 1875 budget that we set. So clearly, those taxes affect affordability. I mean, just looking at this example, 166, the math works. If we go back to the mid range, $4,000 a year, that math doesn't work anymore. We're about 100 and change over. So, I mean, the reality of all of this, okay, and one more example, just for anybody watching out there who's convinced it's the interest rate that's the problem, okay? Let's assume, same exact scenario. Right now, the interest rate is at 7, the taxes are a $4,000 tax bill for the year. Let's assume that you were able to negotiate a really strong discount on this interest rate, something like a quarter point. Quarter point is significant, right? So 6.75 on the interest rate, 1981. Now, as a reminder, 7, 2019. So we're talking about like a $40 difference here. This is not going to change that much. You can go beat up every lender in town to get that quarter point, and you're going to save yourself $40 a month. Not that it's insignificant, but it's not going to drastically change the math of what we're looking at. And that's the point. These numbers don't work. You cannot make a traditional budget work with the numbers that exist in the housing market in many areas right now, which is why you see so many news stories about people leaving Chicago or leaving other metro areas where they're priced out of the marketplace, even if they're making $100,000 a year. It's no longer the gold standard of, wow, you've made it $100,000 a year, you're set. Now, $100,000 a year, these people are actively moving away from communities like Chicago because there's no homes that they can afford that meet the lifestyle they want to live. So the reality is, we're adjusting the budget. This is what people have to do. Maybe instead of 30%, you have to look at housing and say, okay, could I spend 33%? Could I spend 35%? I don't want to advise going to 50. I don't want to advise even going to 40 if you can avoid it. But you're going to have to take a less traditional approach to budgeting if you want to be successful in buying a home that meets your needs right now in many communities. That's just the long and short of it. So maybe instead of using the 30% rule and we're keeping ourselves at 1875, maybe we bump it up slightly and we use something like a 35% rule. If we do that, all of a sudden our budget jumps up to 2187. So you've got about a $300 delta to work with each month if you just budget in an additional 5%. It's significant. 5% is not nothing, but it's about the only way you can get through this housing market. If we take that new threshold, if we take the 2187, all of a sudden this home becomes affordable. You could afford this cost if you're budgeting 35% of your net income as opposed to 30%. You're just going to have to make some sacrifices elsewhere. Maybe you're not eating out as much. Maybe you're not taking that trip this year. Maybe you're not saving like you want to be saving for a short period of time until you're hopefully able to refi in the near future. This is a reality that many home buyers find themselves in, and the budgetary conversations that are happening when people sit down to figure out if they can afford a home. Now, unfortunately, when you look at Chicago, applying a $250,000 budget, again, focused only on single family homes so that we avoid those condo fees, it can be limiting. Pretty much all of the north side here is out of play. Neighborhoods like Lincoln Park, Old Town, Bucktown, Lakeview, all of that. I mean, it's just priced out. You can't find single family homes there for $250,000. Now, you look on the west side, there's a fair number of opportunities. You jump down to the south side, there's a fair number of opportunities. You jump down to the way south side, there's a ton of opportunities. So it's not to say that homes don't exist in Chicago for $250,000. But that sacrifice to move might be as simple as moving neighborhoods, not even out of the city. You might be giving up the neighborhood that you ideally want to be in, or in many cases, the school district that you want to be in, to move to a neighborhood that works for your budget. Now, taking a pause here, we could always consider condos if we wanted to slide in the mix here, but let's look back at our mortgage calculator here. Let's just assume an HOA fee of like $200, which is relatively speaking pretty low compared to what many buildings are. You can see this math starts to get pretty unfriendly again if we're adding $200 in all of a sudden. So we're going to have to adjust that purchase price down. And now all of a sudden we're looking at a purchase closer to like 200 or 220, depending on the condo fees. So could you look at condos? Absolutely. But it's not going to necessarily help with affordability. It's just going to drive your overall purchase price down, accounting for those HOA fees. Depending on where you want to live, if you want to be in Lincoln Park and you have this amount of money to spend, there's nothing else for sale except for condos if you're very lucky at that price point. And even for them, it might be pushing it. But I digress. So, jumping back, we have a $250,000 budget. We're looking in the city of Chicago. Let's look at a couple different options. Let's break down what you can actually afford for that amount of money. First off, we're starting in Belmont Heights. This is on the west side of Chicago, pretty close to the O'Hare Airport. This home is currently for sale for $250,000. Pretty rare, I will say, to see a one bed, one bath, single family home. It's not exactly a common inventory type, but it's not completely unheard of. So, for $250,000, you get about 800 square feet. And you can see this is a nice home. It's been redone recently, luxury vinyl plank floors, recently repainted. The kitchen has new appliances, granite countertops, shaker cabinets. It's a nice house. This is a really good quality build. You also get a little bit of a backyard. It looks like a little shed there, and you have parking in the back. So that's what you can get for 250,000. If we're breaking down the budget on this home, $250,000, 5% down. The property taxes on this are 4264 for the year, so that equates to 355 per month. Your homeowner's insurance of 120, PMI of 50. Your total monthly payment for this property 2105. So we met the budget. We are under our new estimated budget of 2187. This property would theoretically work for somebody who makes $100,000 and is trying to hold themselves to a 35% cap on their net income per month. Obviously, it's one bedroom, so maybe not going to work for everybody, but it is an option. This next home is in Washington Park. This is again listed at 250,000, but now you're getting 4 beds and 2 baths and just over 1500 square feet. So, obviously a significant difference in the actual deliverable asset that you get for this purchase price, but the same rough cost per month. So, the taxes on this place, again, it's still 250,000. It's 5% down. But the taxes on this one are lower. They're closer to $2,000. So again, we're back at that 166 a month, and the affordability is 1916 for this property. And considering what you get for that price, seems like a pretty good value. I mean, it's newly done on the inside. It's not completely gut rehab. They didn't rip everything out and start over, but you can see that it's been touched up recently. They've redone many of the core appliances. They've redone much of the kitchen, redone some of the tile backsplash. You get a nice yard. The floors are new. So a lot of value in this home. Plus, you get the 4 bedrooms, so you can spread out a little bit, take advantage of that space. Chicago's a big city, 77 different neighborhoods, and you can see that when you move neighborhood to neighborhood, you have different pricing dynamics at play. So, yes, on the west side in the Belmont Crane area, you're not going to get the same home that you're going to get on the north side in Rogers Park as you would on the south side in Bridgeport. They're all different. They all have different pricing expectations. So, it can be difficult. You have to look each neighborhood at its own, take it for face value. That's why we run the numbers. That's why we make sure. Okay, last example here. We're jumping over to McKinley Park. So we're coming just slightly back northwest from where we started this conversation. One thing of note, this property, it is listed for the same price essentially, 249,999, whatever, 249,900. It's 250, however you want to look at it. They do have something interesting on their property taxes, something that's called a homeowner's exemption. So in Illinois, in Cook County, you can file an exemption if it's their primary residence, which reduces the tax value of your home before they assess the actual tax rate that you're going to pay. So the result of it, long story short, is you get a couple $100 discount per year on your taxes. Not nothing. I certainly recommend filing it if you're a first-time owner or if you're an owner here in Illinois. And generally, you can also backdate that for 3 years, up to 3 years. So I certainly recommend applying if you are an owner and living in a primary residence here and you haven't done so already. Let's assume you're buying this house, you plan to live there, so you get the same exemption, you'll have the same taxes, right? Their tax bill for the year is $3,553, which equates to $296. I will adjust this just to be specific. 49900. There you go. Can't say I didn't do it. 5% down, and we're going to put the 296. Here you go. So still affordable. This home still works on the budget. It's just over $2,000, 2,045. What you get for that amount, you can see this is the home that needs the most amount of work of anything that we've looked at. Does not have an updated kitchen. Does not have many updates done throughout. You do get a total of 5 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and there are 2 bedrooms in the basement as well. There is a basement, so keep that in mind. It's measured at 640 square feet, so I have to assume that's only the upper level, not the basement. It's not a very large space, something to consider, especially if you're going to be moving in there with more than one person. So, as you can see, with a little bit of knowledge and certainly with a mortgage calculator, you can figure this stuff out. If you set a budget for yourself using the 50/30/20 rule, or obviously in this case, we did 35% of your net income, just kind of buffering a little bit for how expensive everything is right now, you can start to backtrack into how much home you can afford and then use that to guide decisions in your local market. If you're looking at homes there and finding that they're really going to stretch your budget too thin, I would encourage you to be cautious. I understand the enticing nature of buying a really nice house and sort of like impressing everybody in your sphere and showing us all you've done it. But the reality is, people who become house poor quickly run into issues. And God forbid that as soon as you move in, you have unexpected expenses. I mean, I bought this home in November. I have spent no less than 5,000, probably close to 10,000 on repairs in that time that were completely unexpected. So you have to budget for stuff like that. And if you're not budgeting for it or you're not ready for it, you could very quickly find yourself in a troubling financial situation. If you're in a market where homes are truly too expensive for you, there's some things you control, there's some things you can't. Things you can control. You can move away. You don't have to live in any certain market if you can't find what's there. You have to look at other options. Could be as simple as moving a neighborhood over. Here in Chicago, that's often the case. Could be as drastic as moving locations, cities, states, whatever it might be, to find something more affordable. I know that's a tough thing to hear, and I know it's a tough decision to make, but it is a decision that you can make. Another thing you can do, you can start saving differently. Maybe you're putting less towards retirement, more towards saving for a home. Maybe that saving is going towards a down payment rather than just a monthly payment so that you are taking on less interest. There are ways that you can adjust your budgeting to account for this. And probably the most drastic way is to start saving. Stop taking those trips, stop spending as much going out, start saving, really focusing on saving to make sure you have the money you need to afford a home, either in the payments alone or to make a better down payment to make those payments more forgiving. Things you can't change. Interest rates are completely out of anybody's control. They very well could go to 8 or 9% in the foreseeable future. There are some people swearing that that will happen. If it does, that will do drastically negative things to your affordability. Every 1% the interest rate jumps, you lose 10% of your buying power. So if we're talking about multiple jumps in percentage points here, it's a totally different ball game in terms of how much you could afford. Equally, if rates happen to go back to 6 in the foreseeable future, that would be very good for you. You could afford way more home than you thought you could before. Everybody else will be hunting for it too. The market will be super competitive and you're going to have to win in multiple offers. But theoretically speaking, you'll get more home for the value of that home. The other thing that could change, prices. Depending on where you live, there's a legitimate risk that prices could slide down to a drastic extent. If you're in parts of Arizona, parts of Florida, parts of Texas, North Carolina, there's some significant risk that you're going to have a bottom slide on your market because it's rapidly increased so much for so long. We'll see. Again, this is a lot of speculation, but it could happen. The other side of it is prices could keep going up, or like here in Chicago, probably stay the same or keep increasing slightly or slowly, which doesn't do any favors for buyers who decide to wait because it's just going to get more expensive. So that's where I'll leave you today. Hopefully, this is helpful in wrapping your head around the difference between the number the lender shows you in your pre approval and how you should be approaching your budget for housing each month. And maybe more importantly, gives you a methodology to go run your own numbers. The tools I use in this video, you can access for free. They are online. So you can run mortgage calculator numbers in your local area anytime and just figure out what's there for you so that you can make legitimate decisions for you, for your family, and for your future. If I can help, don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to be a resource for you. And if you're looking here in Chicago, schedule time using the description link below. I would love to help you get started on your search and set you on the right path to being successful. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.